Hello and welcome. You're a public servant, dedicated to making a real difference for Canadians. It's a vital role, but let's be honest, sometimes the sheer volume of information can feel overwhelming.
Uh-huh. It definitely can.
So think of this as us helping you navigate some of that. We're going to provide some essential knowledge, starting with something that, well, it might seem a bit behind the scenes, but it truly underpins everything you do.
Exactly. We're diving deep today into government records in Canada. We'll look at common administrative records, operational ones, even those transitory
The
records.
ones we all wonder about.
Right. And also how disposition authorizations fit into this whole picture.
Now, stay with us here, because this isn't just about, old paper files. Understanding how records are handled is absolutely key. It's about accountability.
Knowing why decisions were made.
Yeah, and transparency, letting citizens see how their government works. And ultimately, it affects the services you provide day in, day out. It's like the DNA of good governance, really.
That's a good way to put it. And today we're pulling directly from the Government of Canada's own FAQs on records management. Our mission is just to make these concepts clear, practical.
And hopefully show you why they matter in your daily work. Okay, let's unpack this. First up, common administrative records. What exactly falls under that umbrella?
Okay, so these are the records that kind of keep the government's internal machinery running. They support those administrative functions that are pretty much the same across all federal institutions. Think finance, HR, facilities management, that sort of thing.
The nuts and bolts. It sounds internal, right?
Yeah.
But if that internal stuff isn't working smoothly, it impacts everything else. You can't deliver great citizen services if the back office is chaos.
You absolutely can. It's the foundation.
Yeah.
Then, distinct from that, you have operational records.
Okay.
These are different because they document the unique functions of your specific institution. The programs, the services, the activities that your department is mandated to do by law or regulation or policy.
So this is where the specific mission comes in. These are the records directly tied to the services citizens receive or the interactions they have with your specific part of government.
Precisely. If administrative records are the engine, operational records are, let's say, the journey itself, the delivery of the service.
Got it. Now, transitory records. This one seems to cause some confusion. What's the official line?
The absolute key definition here, and the source is very firm on this, is that transitory records have no business value. Zero. Think duplicates, like CC'd emails you don't need to act on, or maybe rough personal notes that weren't used for any decision.
Right, like a Post-it note reminder you used and then threw away. Convenience copies.
Exactly. Convenience copies are a good example, but, and this is a huge but, the source stresses that transitory records absolutely do not include anything needed to understand programs, operations, decisions, or provide evidence of government work.
Okay, that's a critical distinction. So just because it's a draft or a copy doesn't automatically make it transitory if it holds some kind of information value about the process or decision.
Absolutely not. And that's where things can go wrong. Misclassifying something important as transitory, maybe just to clear out an inbox, can really undermine accountability later on. Imagine trying to figure out why a certain path was taken years ago.
And the key email thread or draft memo explaining the rationale was deleted because someone tagged it transitory. Ouch.
Yeah.
That impacts transparency directly.
It really does. You lose the audit trail, the context, which actually leads nicely into another concept, the Office of Primary Interest, or OPI. Why is knowing the OPI useful for a public servant?
Right. The OPI.
Think of the OPI as the designated leave for a specific function or activity across the government. It's the one institution that's formally accountable for that area, usually assigned through legislation or a mandate letter or policy.
So if multiple departments are involved in something, the OPI is the main one responsible. How does that help with records?
Well, it clarifies who holds the primary responsibility for creating and maintaining the official record set for that function. If you know who the OPI is, you know where the definitive records should live. It avoids, unnecessary duplication and makes sure there's a complete picture somewhere.
Makes sense. Clarity of responsibility. So you know where to go for the authoritative information, which helps everyone, including citizens trying to understand a program. Okay, let's talk duration. How long do we actually need to keep all these records? This is about records retention periods, right?
Yes, exactly. And the Treasury Board Secretariat is pretty clear here. Their directives state that every single institution must establish and maintain retention periods for their information resources that have business value.
So you can't just keep things forever or toss them whenever you feel like it.
Nope. There are rules, and institutions need to figure out these periods based on, well, a couple of key things. Primarily, they need to look at relevant legislation. That includes the big overarching laws, but also any specific acts or regulations that apply just to their institution.
So the law might actually say you must keep financial records for X years or something similar.
It often does, yes. Or it might imply a retention need based on limitation periods for legal action, for instance. It's about legal compliance, accountability, basically ensuring the government operates properly, which is fundamental for public trust.
Okay, so legal requirements are a big driver. What happens after that retention period is up? Can you finally hit delete or shred? This brings us to Library and Archives Canada, LAC, and those disposition authorizations, or DAs.
That's the next crucial step. Just because the retention period you said is over doesn't mean the record can vanish. Section 12 of the Library and Archives of Canada Act is the key here. It says very clearly that no government record can be disposed of, destroyed, deleted, anything without written consent from the Librarian and Archivist of Canada or their delegate.
So LAC acts as a final checkpoint. They get the final say to make sure nothing historically important or with long-term value gets lost.
Exactly. They are the stewards of Canada's documentary heritage. And that written consent they provide, that's the disposition authorization, the DA.
The permission slip.
The official permission slip, yes. It authorizes an institution to dispose of records that no longer have operational utility for that department. Disposal could mean destruction, or it could mean transferring the records to LAC's archival holdings, or sometimes alienation from government control, though that's less common.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier there are different kinds, ISDAs and MIDAs.
Right. An ISDA institution-specific disposition authorization is tailored just for one specific institution and its unique records. A MIDA multi-institution disposition authorization is broader. It covers records common to several or even all government institutions.
And there's a distinction between older MIDAs and newer ones based on the date January 1st, 2015. What's the significance of that date?
It marks a shift in how MIDAs are applied. Generally, for MIDAs issued before 2015, institutions could often use them unless they received a newer specific ISDA after January 1st, 2015. But for MIDAs issued after that date, only the institutions specifically named in that MIDA can actually use it.
Okay. So it became more targeted after 2015. That sounds like something you'd really need to confirm within your own department which DAs actually apply to you now.
Definitely. The absolute most critical piece of information is whether your institution has received any new DA, ISDA, or MIDA since January 1st, 2015. Because if it has, that new one generally overrides the older ones for the records it covers.
Except, didn't the source mention a few MIDAs that always apply, regardless?
Yes, good catch. There are 3 government-wide MIDAs that our source highlights as still being applicable to all institutions, even if they have a newer DA. Those are DA 2016-1001 for transitory records.
The ones with no business value we talked about.
Right. Then MIDA 2009-001, which covers records provided in confidence for dispute resolution processes. And MIDA 96023, related to managing digitized records. So those 3 are sort of universal constants.
Okay, good to know those 3 always apply. Now, going back to those older DAs, before 2015, they sometimes included things called agreements for transfer and terms and conditions. What were those about?
Those were specific components, particularly for records identified as having archival value, meaning they needed to be preserved by LAC. The agreement for transfer formalized the plan to move those records to LAC. The terms and conditions were more detailed. They specified exactly which records needed to be transferred based on their function or content and outlined the process. They were binding commitments.
So ensuring the historically valuable stuff actually made its way to the archives.
Precisely. And sometimes, especially with MIDAs covering common administrative records, there were also functional profiles.
What do those do?
They were basically detailed descriptions or maps of those common functions, like finance or HR. They broke them down into specific activities and the types of records created. This helped institutions correctly apply the terms and conditions, figure out which specific admin records were covered by the MIDA and needed transfer or specific handling.
Like a detailed checklist to ensure consistency across departments for common stuff.
Okay.
Now, here's a point the source really flags, and it seems super important. MIDAs do not set retention periods.
Absolutely crucial distinction. Cannot stress this enough. A DA, whether MIDA or ISDA, is about disposition. It's the permission from LAC for what happens after a record has reached the end of its usefulness to the institution.
So it's not telling you how long to keep it for your own business needs?
No. The retention period, how long you need to keep it for operations, legal reasons, etc., that's determined by your institution based on your needs and those legislative requirements we discussed. The DA kicks in after that period expires, determining the final fate destruction, transfer to LAC, etc.
That clarifies things immensely. Institution sets retention, LAC authorizes final disposition. Okay, so how do institutions actually figure out those retention periods, especially for common things?
Well, LAC provides help here too. They've developed tools called generic valuation tools, or GVTs. These GVTs cover many common administrative activities and even some common operational ones found across government.
And what do these DVTs offer?
They describe the activity, the typical records generated, and importantly, they provide recommended retention periods.
Recommended. So not mandatory rules, but guidance.
Exactly. They're a fantastic starting point based on general best practices and common legal factors, but each institution must take those recommendations and adapt them. They need to consider their own specific legislation, their unique policies, their actual business processes. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Makes sense. What about for those unique operational records, the ones tied directly to your department's specific mandate? What are the main factors when setting retention for those?
The source highlights a few key things. First, obviously the business need. How long do you actually need that information readily accessible to run the program or provide the service effectively?
Practical needs.
Right. Second, again, any specific legislation, regulations, or policies that dictate minimum retention for those particular operational records. And third, and this is important, you need to consider the value of that information as potential evidence.
Evidence. How so?
Well, these records might be needed down the road to show how a decision was made, to demonstrate due process was followed, maybe even to protect legal rights, both the government's and citizens. They document accountability.
So you need to think about potential future needs for proof or explanation.
Absolutely. That's why the source suggests, and it's good practice, to have your institution's information management senior official or equivalent review proposed retention periods. They can help ensure all these angles, business needs, legal requirements, evidential value are properly considered.
Okay, this is coming together. We have types of records, responsibility, OPI, retention periods, set by the institution based on needs and laws, guided by GVTs, and finally, disposition, authorized by LAC via DAs. So when a record hits the end of its retention period and you have LAC's permission to dispose, which DA do you use first? There's an order, right?
Yes, there's a specific sequence to follow to ensure you're compliant. First, you check. Has our institution received an ISDA, an institution-specific one, after January 1st, 2015? If yes, that's generally your primary authority for the records it covers.
Okay, start with the newest, most specific one if it exists. What if there isn't one issued after that date?
Then you work down the hierarchy of older authorizations. First, look for any older ISDAs that applied just to your institution.
Still specific to you, but older.
Right. If none apply, then you look at MIDAs, the multi-institution ones. Specifically, MIDAs related to your operational records or specific media types, like electronic records.
Operational MIDAs next.
Yep. Then, if none of those cover the record, you look at MIDAs related to common administrative records.
Admin MIDAs after operational ones.
Correct. And finally, that universal DA for transitory records, number 26 cents year 01. That can generally be applied anytime for genuinely transitory stuff, unless a specific ISD your institution has says something different about handling transitory records.
Wow, okay, that's a clear path. Check for new ISDA first, then old ISDA, then operational MIDA, then admin MIDA, and transitory DA is usually applicable throughout. The key seems to be knowing if you got a new DA after Jan 1, 2015.
That's the critical first question, yes. And look, this whole system, it might seem complex, maybe a bit bureaucratic.
It can feel that way sometimes.
Sure, but it's not just about rules for rules' sake. It's fundamentally about ensuring government operates transparently and accountably. It's how we make sure we can justify decisions, learn from the past, and plan better for the future, all of which ultimately serves Canadians.
And for you, the public servant listening, understanding this, even at a high level, directly impacts your work and its value. When records are managed well, it builds trust, it improves efficiency.
And it makes it possible for citizens to get the information they need or understand the services they receive. Think about trying to resolve an issue for a citizen. Having clear, accessible records makes all the difference.
Absolutely. So let's quickly recap. We've talked about the main types of records: administrative, operational, and that tricky transitory category. We covered the OPI clarifying responsibility, setting retention periods based on needs and laws, and the vital role of LAC and disposition authorizations, the different types, and the order to apply them.
And we stress that DAs authorize disposition, not retention. That's your institution's job, guided by tools like GVTs, but tailored to your context.
It all connects back to good governance and serving Canadians effectively, which leads to a final thought for you to consider.
Yeah, think about this. When have well-managed records, maybe ones you helped create or manage, made a positive difference? Maybe it streamlined something for you, or more importantly, helped a citizen get what they needed.
How does knowing about these processes, retention, disposition, the types of records, empower you to ensure those positive outcomes keep happening, maybe even more often?
Or consider the records you're working with today. How might they be viewed in 10, 20, 50 years? Will they clearly show the why behind decisions that affect Canadians? It puts a different perspective on saving that email or finalizing that report properly, doesn't it?
It really does. This deep dive gives you that crucial foundation. We strongly encourage you, take this back, explore the specific guidelines, the DAs, the tools that apply within your own institution.
Because strengthening your understanding here really does contribute to a more transparent, accountable, and effective public service for everyone in Canada.